Can you guys hear me? No. Sorry, hopefully we'll get this up.
Are you hearing them? I can't hear them.
I heard them just a minute ago.
Okay. This is weird. I don't know why this is not doing this.
Uh,
Okay, well, I need to have the video on this. The Zoom needs to be on here. This is just now.
So if I put my headset on, it's not going to help at all.
I'm not sure. Is this the usual when we stream out of this computer, or is this
I
different?
think so. I don't know.
Oh.
It was the same thing.
Okay.
I think it is. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and if we could have that, if you could just talk and have them talk real quick for me.
Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
I think one thing is that I can't, if you're using the headset, then I can't hear the volume out of the Zoom.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So maybe if you pull the headset so I can hear what they're saying, and then I'll just try to pick it all up of this mic, what you say and they say.
How do I turn off the volume to this? Because I think that's what's causing the problem. The volume needs to be turned.
Okay, yeah, maybe that one. Okay.
Let's try this.
And then let's just hear. Okay, try again.
Hi, everyone.
Sorry about this. I don't understand really what's happening. Okay. And then when you're talking, can you hear them talking? No one's talking now.
For everyone who's waiting, Bonnie's working on some technical difficulties. We'll get started soon. John Stahl is out, so I'll be chairing tonight. And I think the only other person we might be waiting on is Counselor Nicodemus. Or are we not expecting him tonight?
Well, I can see and hear
I
that.
have texted him to see if
And then-
I can find him.
Okay.
And it's all coming out of here, so
Yeah.
Thank you.
if I use my headset, would that make more sense?
Yep. I think that's fine. And then I'll just move the mic over to this. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? I think there's still feedback. Is it okay?
You're getting a little bit of feedback. Do you have more than one device within
Yeah.
hearing distance of that room that's playing the meeting?
this any better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just gonna need to get a mic in front of you as well, so that I can hear you. And then we'll be good. Okay.
Order the meeting of the Milwaukee Budget Committee. We usually start with introductions, and so we'll introduce the committee members first, and then the staff and the visitors. And I'm just going to call you as I see you across my screen. So I'll start with Angel.
Hi, Counselor Angel Falconer.
Kaylee,
Kaylee Nance, citizen member.
Mary,
Mary Rose, citizen member.
Kathy,
I don't have the same lineup. Council President Kathy Heisey.
Leslie,
Leslie Schochner, citizen member.
Mark,
Mark Emma, Mayor.
Michael.
Michael Osborne, citizen member.
Okay, I think that concludes all the members. As noted, the chair, John Stahl, is out of town this week, and Councilor Nicodemus hopes to join us a little bit later. Staff, Bonnie,
Hi,
Hi, Bonnie Ness, finance director.
Judy,
Judy Serio, accountant.
Ann,
Anna Over, city manager.
Keith. Am I not supposed to call on people who don't have their cameras on? I'm gonna do it anyway. Well, that doesn't look like. Oh, I see Keith and Kelly. Okay, Kelly.
Hi, Kelly Brooks, assistant city manager.
All right, and our two guests. I don't know if Bonnie, you want to introduce them, or shall we let them introduce themselves, or?
Yeah, so actually, Danette Benjamin is here from the Oregon Department of Revenue, and also Jean Jitan, I think I'm saying that correctly, are here to do a presentation on property tax.
Great. Well, welcome to you guys. Thanks for joining us. So approval of the minutes of the November. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong date of the February 22nd, 2021 meeting. Did anyone have any edits for those minutes? And if not, does anyone want to make a motion?
I have a question.
Okay.
I don't understand there's a paragraph that says Chief Strait explained the impact of fines and forfeitures. The last sentence says there's a moratorium on expirations, and I don't know what the expirations being referenced are. I'm wondering if that was supposed to be
That was the eviction. That was for
evictions.
Yeah.
Expiration of evictions.
So we were talking, yeah, so I
Okay.
believe that was the state had not yet acted to extend the state eviction moratorium.
Okay.
Are we sure that's not?
There was no context for
Oh,
that.
they all disagree with me, so I'm lying. I'm going to go with it's what Counselor Heisey or Counselor Faulkner or Counselor Beatty says.
What is it? I just
Driver's license suspension.
Yeah, it's.
Is that it? Got it.
Yeah.
expiration of driver's license. Is that what it is?
Is
Or
it
tags.
Yeah, it's tags. It's vehicle registration.
Vehicle registration.
Okay. So DMV expiration.
Right. So the trouble is that the police department can't pull over anyone with expired tags because people with expired tags haven't had a reliable way to get new tags for some time. So that was the.
I would suggest that we pay DMV.
Which page is that on?
You
And
froze,
this gets-
Leslie.
And there's about a little more than halfway down. It's a paragraph that starts with Chief Straight.
Leslie, you're getting hung up a bit. It might be helpful to turn off your camera and see if that keeps you better connected to us.
Right, it does seem like that phrase, there is a moratorium on expirations, is less than clear. So do we have some proposed alternate language? I don't know if you said something, Leslie, that we didn't hear.
I did suggest just adding DMV.
Oh, okay. Expirations, okay. Bonnie, is any problem making that change?
Nope, we can make that change. I think all you need to do is approve the minutes as amended.
Correct. Do I have a motion to that?
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Did I have a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the February 22nd meeting as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard? Minutes are approved. I think public comments are next. I don't see anybody here. Oh, no, we do have someone attending. Oh, no, somehow Keith moved over to attendees. I don't think we have any public who are seeking to comment. Bonnie, do you know otherwise?
I don't have anybody that is in the queue to talk tonight.
Okay, so I guess I'll turn it over to the city manager for her update.
Thank you. So there's so many things going on. So I think the first piece to say is that we invited you all to come to a discussion with the city council actually two of them over the last couple months around the federal funds, the ARPA funds that are coming in from the federal government. The city is receiving $4.2 million. We've had a couple of conversations about how those dollars will be expended. There's more guidelines coming out, and some of this will be new for council members as well, because I sat through training on it today. But the key pieces of it are that we can do revenue loss backfilling. So that is what we had put into the discussion when we met with council. That is an allowable use. Roads are not an allowable use unless it's as a backfill. So you can backfill the funds into the lost transportation gas tax dollars, but you can't add money towards a project that you want to construct that's transportation. There's some thought that this is because they're doing an infrastructure package in DC as well, and they didn't want to overlap the projects. At first we had talked about doing some affordable housing projects around using these dollars. The conversation we had today is that you would have to be in a qualified census tract community. So there would have to be neighborhoods that actually under HUD qualify as being 60% or more below the area median income. And at this point, looking at the map out of HUD, that's not the case in Milwaukee for any of our neighborhoods. The second way you would qualify to put money towards affordable housing would be if you could show that a neighborhood was disproportionately affected by a loss in revenue. So, for instance, in some communities, if a plant closed, even though prior to the plant closing, they would have been above the 60% mark, with the plant closing, their community was decimated. They could use the funds in that community in order to support affordable housing. So that was super helpful. I did, Mayor, have a conversation or ask the question about broadband and studies associated with broadband so that we would know if that could be funded. They did not have an answer. So I'm going to have to submit that question into the Federal Register. So we'll be submitting that question to the federal government and asking that question The small business work that council prioritized is an allowable use. So they were very clear that all of that is an allowable use. Same thing with the rent assistance money that we were doing. That is also an allowable use. So most of the funds are what we expected they would be in that conversation, but I'm still learning more, and we'll get even more information in the next 30 days. Both Bonnie and I have been going to separate trainings just to try and get our feet under us around what the federal government's expectations are for these funds. The first guidance from the federal government is about 151 pages. She and I have both made it through the first half, but we still have some more work to do. So generally, we're on track for using those funds. We're also, as an aside, leading a conversation with all the Clackamas cities so that we can hear what other communities are doing before all the funds are allocated, as well as sort of gut check each other on how we're planning on expending the dollars. So that meeting is happening in 3 weeks. And after that conversation, we'll be better prepared with some final recommendations to you all based on what you have said you're interested in funding. So there's that piece. There also was a large allocation that went to the state from the ARPA funds, and we received a phone call, thankfully, I'm so appreciative of, from both our senator and from our representative, asking how they might participate in doing some work here in the city using the funds that they were allowed to allocate out of the ARPA funds. They both put in incredible asks for the city of Milwaukee that would allow us to build parks. We're waiting to hear from the state on whether or not those are allowable uses. So we will know that hopefully here in the next month as well. But I really just, whatever the outcome, have to say how much I appreciate both the senator and the representative coming forward with some support for our community. We've long had these parks waiting for a moment like this, and it could be a really pretty magical experience if those are projects that can be funded. So I think that those are the primary pieces of infrastructure and money discussions that we're having right now. We are also having some staffing discussions in the coming months. So June 1st is when all of the staff will start being in. We are expecting that they'll be in or on new telework plans by June 21st. So every employee will work at the city at least some of the time in our physical buildings, but we're trying to find a way to be flexible within this new world that we're all living with and in. So we're working through that with various teams right now, and we're just excited to be able to have everybody back able to peek over a cubicle wall or peek in a door to say hello. So it'll be absolutely wonderful when we get to that point. And I think that's everything that I have, Counselor.
Great, thank you. And the city council, I think, is going to be back to meeting in July, in-person meeting. So that'll be nice too. So I guess we're ready for our guests. Bonnie, did you want to introduce them or?
Yeah, I'll reintroduce. So we've had a lot of questions in the past regarding property taxes, and so I thought it'd be a good idea to bring in Danette and Jean over here to meet with everybody again. You may remember Danette from a couple years ago when she was here to do a training on property taxes. So today we're gonna do a similar training, but a lot more in depth. And so I want to welcome them. They are super helpful, and I'll turn it over to Danette, which I believe I made you a co-host so you can share your screen for a PowerPoint.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to have Jean kick us off, but I'm going to try to control the PowerPoint here. So bear with me 1 minute so I make sure I select the right screen.
I was wondering how we were going to do that, but that sounds great.
We'll try.
While she's doing that, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here. I hope you enjoyed the weather the last few days. It just changed on us. I'm in Kaiser, Oregon, so I have cloudy or overcast.
Jean, can you tell me, is this the full screen?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure it wasn't the other one. Okay, ready when you are.
All right. If you can change the next screen, thank you. My name is Jean Jutan, and with me here is Danette Benjamin. We are from the Department of Revenue, Finance, Taxation, and Exemptions team. For some of you who do not know us, we are made up of 4 analysts, myself, Danette, Melanie Cutler, and Arlen Stewart. Just want to introduce about what we do and some of the things that we do here at the Finance, Taxation, and Exemptions unit. So we do training. We train officials on local budget law, such as workshops, virtual training every year. We are available year-round to answer any questions you may have when it comes to local budget law. We also provide budget manuals and forms. We review over 1,500, at least 1,500 district certifications to make sure they're in compliance with local budget law. And on request, if you would like us to review your budgets, we are available and we can do that for you as well. We also work with county assessors and county tax collectors on various issues such as interpreting property tax laws, or if there's some kind of research on case laws. That's some of the things that we do. We also work with them on issues related to tax rules, tax computation and error corrections, exemptions, and these are just a few of the things that we do. So in summary, we are your resources to answer any questions you may have. Change slide.
Oh,
yeah, that's fine. So the way we're going to present this is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Oregon property tax history, Measure 5 and Measure 50. Then I'm going to hand over the presentation to Danette, and she's going to talk about other consideration for property taxes, such as the exemptions and urban renewal. She's also going to discuss the relationship between local budget law and the property tax cycle, and some other resources, such as the the Shoots YouTube video of the property tax ferry. So let's begin. Take us into this, I like this little tunnel here. We're going into a time machine. So we know property taxes is an important component to the local government district's total revenue. So I'm going to discuss in a very high level of property taxes, so the history of property taxes. If you want to learn a little bit more in detail, on the screen, on the slide in front of you, there is a booklet called The Brief History of Oregon Property Taxation. You can contact us and we can provide that booklet to you. So here's a high level of the history of property taxes, and we're going to step into that time machine that you see in front of you. And what was Oregon property taxation like before those 2 statewide ballot measures that dramatically altered our tax system? So Oregon had a pure levy-based property tax system. So the idea was that under the levy-based system, the taxing district like yourself receives the full amount of property tax authority regardless of the assessed value. At that time, there was no definition of what an assessed value is. So what that meant is each district, like the city of Milwaukee, calculated its own tax levy based on its budget needs. The county assessor estimated the real market value of all property. So generally speaking, the full market value of the property was taxable. Again, at that time, there was no definition, no consideration of what assessed value, because that was not a consideration at that time. So the tax rate was simply recalculated up and down to raise the same amount of money. So the district levied an amount based on their needs, and that amount could fluctuate based on certain limitations. And the levies they had constitutional limited annual growth of 6%. So that means the levies can increase up to an annual growth rate of 6% with no voter approval. If the levies increased by more than 6%, then they required voter approval. So consequently, what happened is that there was no difference between imposed taxes and tax levies under this system. So any changes in value from year to year impacted the property owner. So that was the history. Change slide. All right, so here comes Measure 5 in 1990. This was a major constitutional amendment that were voted in by some of you probably to pass in Oregon. The reasoning behind this bill was valid. It was to stabilize the growth of taxes, but there was a lot of unintended consequences, and the biggest being the inflexibility to make changes as needed. So what Measure 5 did is it set a constitutional limitation on the allocation of property taxes for schools and other government operations. So those limitations were $5 per thousand for schools, $10 per thousand for general government. Taxes exceeding the limit are reduced or compressed to bring them within the Measure 5 limits. So property tax compression is the process used to reduce property taxes to the Measure 5 limit. So to have no compression loss, you must make sure that the property tax value is less than the Measure 5 tax calculation. And if the property tax is higher than the Measure 5 calculation, then the property tax must be reduced. I'm going to give in the next slide or two, I'm going to have an example of how that compression works. But the idea is that Measure 5 is that indicators to make sure that the property tax value is not higher than the Measure 5 limitation. And if there is compression, it starts in a specific order. It's going to begin with the local option taxes, then your permanent rates. So if City of Milwaukee has multiple local option levies, if there's compression, then those are going to be reduced, or all of those local option levies are going to be reduced. If City of Milwaukee has general obligation bonds, those are not included in the compression. They're not subject to compression. It's only local option levies and then your permanent rate. So here's the good news is that the assessor is going to calculate all this for you. This calculation is done by property, each property, for both limitations, the school and for the general obligations. The SAL report, which is the Summary of Assessment and Levies report, will show what was the loss to compression and for the district. So a SAL report is a statewide statistical report on property taxes and property values, and the assessor is required to file that information about the assessment roll and the summary of the roll to the Department of Revenue. So that's with the Measure 5 limitation. But we have one more thing. Another major amendment went through. Thank you. So, move forward 7 years later. In 1997, Measure 50 came about, another major constitutional amendment. There was in 1996 a measure called 47 that did the same thing as Measure 50, which I will discuss in just a little bit. But I just want to let you know that there was some flaws, so they adjusted it. So Measure 50 became the basis of our current structure. Okay. So Measure 50, what did it introduce? It introduced the assets assessed value growth of 3% of an existing property, and it replaced most properties or most levies with permanent rate taxes. So in other words, Measure 50 gave all existing tax districts a permanent operating tax limit on the assessed value. And that permanent rate is the maximum rate without voter approval. So the assessed value is going to be based on the lower of your prior year's maximum assessed value plus 3% or its market value. So Measure 50 is the one that transformed our system from that one primarily based on levies to one that's based on rates. Again, this permanent rate is determined by the county assessor for the purposes of calculating. I looked up in our local budget manual on the last page. It has a list of all the permanent rates of our districts, our taxing districts. So City of Milwaukee or Milwaukee City permanent rate is $6 $6.5379 per thousand of the assessed value. So what that means is City of Milwaukee can choose to impose the full permanent rate as a full permanent rate. You can levy in any year less than that rate, and you do not lose that full authority for the following year to impose the full amount, the maximum permanent rate. The maximum limit cannot be changed by the district. It is permanent. It's a permanent rate. I mentioned in our previous slide that for the compression, that local option levies are affected first, and then once the local option levies goes down to zero, then the permanent rates are then subject to the compression. So in summary, the whole changes in the 90s moved us from the levy-based system, where the district levied an amount based on their needs, and that amount could fluctuate based on certain limitations. Now we have a rate-based system where each district has a rate that is their limitation, and they can't collect more unless there's more value in the area. Whew. That's a little history of real property tax, and pretty much how the Measure 5 and Measure 50 impacted with our property taxes. But I'm a visual person, and I like to, next slide please, I like to show an example of how these, how the property taxes on compression works. Danette did a great job of pulling, these are actual properties within Milwaukee districts, and these are homes that are neighbors, and they have the same tax rate for each of these homes. And what is going to be nice is that we're going to see how each of these homes, what their tax bill looks like. So for instance, let's take a look at house 1 on the far right-hand corner. So let's see, their square footage is about 2,373 square foot, built in 1999. You'll notice the assessed value is 467,000 plus. So the assessor now is going to calculate that property tax value based on the assessed value by taking into account the combined tax rate of 19.7673. So it comes out with a dollar amount. So let's assume it comes to close to $9,000 is the tax bill that the property owner would have to pay. Now the assessor is going to do the Measure 5 limit. We need to make sure that property tax bill is not more than the Measure 5 limit. So now we're going to do that calculation based on the real market value. So the assessor is going to take into account the real market value of that home of house 1, which is 478,000 plus. And then they're going to take into account the limitations, those $5 per thousand for the schools and general obligation. There may be some bonds. They're going to take into this rate to calculate what the tax bill would be under the Measure 5 limit. In this example, for this house, the tax bill under the Measure 5 limit is $8,058. So what happened here? Obviously, the house tax bill under the Measure 50 or based on the assessed value is higher. So compression works. We have to reduce that to the Measure 5 limit. So now what that means to you as a City of Milwaukee is you're going to receive less, and the amount is going to affect the local option levies for, in this case, it shows there is a compression loss for the education of $247, and there was some loss into the general government operations for $181. So that's the idea with the compression loss, that if there is compression, that's less money coming into the district. But take a look at house number 2. What's interesting is that very similar size, 2,300 square foot, and the real market value is very similar. However, the assessed value is less. So when you calculate the assessed value for house number 2, that tax bill looks like $3,167. But when you calculate the real market value, taking into account the rates, the limitation on the rates, it's much more than that. It's going to be, I'm going to assume, closer to the first house bill, the 8,000. So the bill under the assessed value is less than the Measure 5 limit. So there's no compression, and the property owner is going to pay the $3,167. So you see that you may have a neighbor, similar home, but even similar market value, but the assessed value may be different. So their tax bill may be different because of the assessed value that's been calculated by the assessor. I just want to point out house number 3. You'll take a look at its 2,923 square foot. Assessed value is $549,000, but the real market value is over $900,000. So the assessed value, when you calculate the tax bill, it's $10,852. But when you do the real market value, the Measure 5 limit calculation, it's going to be much more than the 10,000. So there was no compression. So that house, which is a neighbor to the house number 1 and 2, is going to have a tax bill of $10,852.47. So again, the assessed value is the value of the property subject to valuation, and the assessed value is based on the lower of the prior year's max assessed value plus 3%. It's the lower of that or its real market value. So Danette pulled up this information that based on the latest property tax statistics for 2019-20, City of Milwaukee lost about $53,534 to compression. So that was about 0.59% of your total tax extended. So I'm going to pause here. A lot of information. If you have any questions, I'll answer them before I hand it over to Danette.
I definitely have a question. I see Michael has a question, so I'll let Michael start.
Michael, go ahead.
Thank you. So you talk about compression, but is there a term that you use for the loss in taxes between house 2 and house 1? Because there's a $5,000 limit or difference, and in house 2 it's just basically when they were built. So what? I mean, you're still losing $5,000 in tax revenue, but I was just wondering, what do you call that?
When
Dean, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
There isn't really an answer to that. It's just part of how the system flushed out. It's kind of a known, I don't want to use this term lightly, but it's kind of a known inequity that the houses that existed prior to Measure 50 ended up with lower AVs now in comparison to houses that were built newer. And neither Gene or I are appraisers, and we don't work directly with how the MAV gets set originally, but there is a formula that gets used to establish that maximum assessed value, and it's based on the current real market value in the area times a change property ratio, which is established year to year. And so it's when MAVs were set originally, though, it was the value of your home in 1990, I believe, or 95, minus 10% and then plus 3%. So I have no idea how they came up with those figures back in the day, but there is definitely some gaps between how they work out nowadays with the AV on older homes versus newer homes.
But is there a way to calculate or quantitate what that number might be? Like, how much does the city lose out on homes that were built pre-95?
That I don't know. There may be some statistical reports out there, but nothing that I'm aware of. I can tell you that this topic is something that frequently gets discussed, and that is property tax reform, I should say. There's work groups ongoing on it, and so it's likely that there are some people looking at that, but I've not directly seen any of that.
Thank you.
So you sort of answered what my question was, which was that newer homes are more likely to have compression, correct?
Somewhat. Anytime the gap is smaller. Yeah.
Anytime the gap is smaller between assessed
RMV and AV.
Okay. And I thought the county could reassess it on 7 years or some sort of cycle that they could reassess the value of homes. Is that not the case? And what triggers, what kind of improvements to a home in terms of conditions and things like that trigger a reassessment of the assessed value?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So they're always looking at your real market value. They do the home real market values, and again, we're not appraisers, so a little bit out of our scope. But they do what's called a mass appraisal system. So all the homes get valued kind of based on market trends, and so this real market value is grown based on that. And then if you do something, some type of like a remodel, there's certain degrees of remodel that will trigger your maximum assessed value to be reset. There's certain exemptions, they call them exception events, when you come out of an exemption, which I'm going to talk about exemptions in a few moments, that will cause your maximum assessed value to be reset, and that could trigger your assessed value to raise. So there are some situations that will trigger those values to get reset, but they're not frequent.
I had a question. Even if the assessed value is reset and say it jumps up 15%, the city doesn't gain 15% more of taxes on that assessed value, though, correct? There's still a cap because of Measure 5 on how much it can increase.
Yeah, correct.
The
property taxes. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Measure 5 limit is that whatever it was, when you calculate the Measure 50 based on the assessed value of the property, you still always have to use the Measure 5 as that limitation of how much the tax bill can be for that property.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add to that is that if there is compression loss, it's shared amongst the districts. So it starts with the local option levies, as Jean said, and then if there's it needs to go down to the permanent rates, then it's proportional of all the districts. So you wouldn't necessarily lose your full levy, you'd lose maybe a fraction of it. So are there any other questions on that before we move to the next section?
Actually, I just want to make sure I understand what Mary just asked and what you said. So to put it another way, House A, does some improvements and adds an addition, and it's now reassessed, and it's 15% more valuable than its assessed value was previously. But it can only go up 3%. Its taxes can only go up 3% per year, even though the assessed value was increased and is recognized as such.
No, not necessarily. So if the maximum, if the addition or the changes to the home were sufficient that it caused a reset of the maximum assessed value, then the assessor would look at the maximum assessed value versus the real market value the next year to determine which was the assessed value. And then they would calculate the taxes based on the assessed value. And then they would do the compression test based on the real market value. So that's where the difference is. Compression is tested off of real market value, and your taxes are assessed based off your assessed value. And then they would determine if they needed to compress from there. So yeah, you might not necessarily just get 15% more taxes because the value went up 15%. That makes sense.
Danette was going to go over. Are you showing them the video, Danette, of the property tax?
I am not, but I will tell them about it at the end. So
yeah, I'll let her continue to talk about that in the end. Then talks more about property.
You're getting ahead of me.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Any other questions? All right,
Our property tax.
Hand it over to Oh, go ahead, Jeanette. I was
No,
just
to
gonna
say
hand
our
it over to
property.
you.
Oh, I love Zoom meetings where we all talk over each other. We don't need to. Our property tax system is definitely not. It's not an easy thing to understand, and it's you know, we all have teams that specialize in certain areas for a reason because of the complexities. So, you know, we kind of gave you a taste for the background and where we're at now. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about two other factors that can impact your tax revenue. And these are probably two of the biggest ones. I mean, there's lots of things that happen in the property tax world, but I'm going to talk a little bit about property tax exemptions as well as urban renewal. So the first thing I'm talking about is exemptions. So the general rule of thumb in Oregon is that all property is taxable unless it's specifically exempted by law. And so exemptions are legislatively enacted programs that relieve qualified individuals or organizations from paying part or all of their property taxes. We do have over 120 currently, and you all benefit from at least a few of these. There's an exemption out there right now for your car. Your car does not have to you don't have to pay property taxes on your car because you register it in lieu of property taxes. There's also exemptions for your personal property within your home, so you don't have to pay property taxes on your TV or your couch or any of your other personal possessions. And then there's bigger property taxes for things like government properties, all exempt. There's exemptions for religious organizations, charitable entities. There's economic development exemptions as well as housing exemptions. There's any gambit of exemptions across the board. This is a little chart here from our property tax statistics report, which I have a link here at the bottom, or at least the name of it at the bottom. All of these documents you can find on our website if you're curious, but you can see that it gives you some ballpark of what you have in value in exemptions as well as assessed value and real market value. So on the left, you've got public exemptions, then you've got in the middle some social welfare exemptions. Those would be things like charitable exemptions, religious organizations. There's more than that I'm not thinking of right now. And then we've got business and housing and other miscellaneous exemptions. So you can see how many accounts are estimated as being exempt from those programs. And I say estimated because some of these programs do require application every year and some don't. So there's some that they've estimated as best they can how many are out there, but some are unknown. There's not very many that apply to individuals' homesteads. I think there's only about maybe 5 or 6 that can apply to an individual home. So most of these are going to some sort of entity or organization that's giving some sort of public benefit in somehow. Let's see here. So any questions on exemptions? No, that's pretty high. So the reason that exemptions are important now is because Jean talked about when we talked about Measure 50 and before Measure 50, how we were a levy-based system. And so if there was a loss to tax revenue, that loss shifted to other taxpayers to kind of pick up that gap. But now that we're a rate-based system, anytime that there is a loss to a taxable property, there's a direct kind of correlation to tax revenue. So when you exempt property, those taxes that would have been assessed on that property, they don't shift to somebody else. They just are lost. So that is one of the downfalls of a levy-based system versus a rate-based system versus a levy-based system. The exception to that is bond levies. Bond levies still shift because they're a dollar levy, and so they shift to the taxable property. Okay. So the other thing I went too far. Sorry. The other thing I was asked to talk a little bit about was urban renewal. And so urban renewal is one of our favorite topics here. It's not the easiest thing for sure. If any of you have read any of the urban renewal statutes or rules, it is like reading a foreign language. But interestingly, urban renewal started as a federal housing program back in the 60s. And the way it worked is there was some federal money available that states could have access to as long as they did some sort of match to it. And so the way most states chose to match that revenue was to withhold it from the taxing districts. And so they created this tax increment financing thing. And it's kind of been overcomplicated over the years because a lot of people have made changes to it, but you had existing programs, so they've kept those and then kind of added to it, and it's morphed into this somewhat of a monster now, and it's trying to work its way back. But I will tell you that for every term in urban renewal, there's probably at least 2 terms that mean the same thing. So I'll try to use consistent language and explain if I'm using different ones, but it can get really complicated. But these arrows, the little boxes here, are kind of representing just a basic flow of how urban renewal gets established and then gets to the tax assessor. So in the dark blue on the left, you're seeing that an urban renewal, every municipality has an urban renewal, every county or city has an urban renewal agency that they are able to activate by statute. And what they do is, if you are a municipality that can activate one of these, then you have to declare that you have some sort of blight in your area, and you would like to create the urban renewal in order to combat that blight. So you create the urban renewal, and then you create a plan for how you're going to work with. Excuse me, my daughter just came in the house or left. You create the plan in order to make your improvements. And then the plan gets adopted, and this is a very public process, so you're going to be involving the tax districts, you're going to be involving the public, you're going to be establishing your plan parameters, as well as your maximum indebtedness, or the amount of money that you can spend in order to do what you want to do for the plan. Once you've created your plan and you've adopted it, you're going to send that over to the assessor, and the assessor is going to create what's called a frozen value. And the frozen value is really important because that is going to become the basis for the financing, for the tax increment financing that the urban renewal receives, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So the urban renewal agency itself, it acts just like any other tax districts. It's a separate entity from the city. And so the urban renewal will have its own budget. It'll go through the whole budget process just like the city would. And the only difference is, instead of certifying a tax rate, they're going to certify an increment value to use. And that increment value is the difference between the value right now versus the value that was frozen when the plan was adopted. And that hopefully will make more sense on the next slide. And the assessor takes that information and they use that increment value to calculate the division of tax based on the type of plan, the urban renewal plan, and what taxes they're allowed to divide. So this is what it looks like. And this is a very simplistic view of urban renewal calculation. It's actually a pretty complicated thing. So urban renewal, the tax increment financing, or sometimes that's referred to as division of tax, is what urban renewals use to pay for the things that they do. So it starts out with 3 pieces of information that the assessor needs. They first need to know the tax rates. So they need to know the levies of all the taxing districts that are going to overlap the plan area, because those are all the levies that are going to get divided. They're going to have to know the urban renewal plan type to know which type of taxes can be divided, because certain urban renewal plans can divide only permanent rates, certain ones can divide local options as well as permanent rates, some can divide bonds. There's about 5 different plan types right now in existence. They're going to have to know the increment value, which is, again, is that value that is anything that the urban renewal has gained since it was frozen, since it was the plan was adopted, so that gain in value. And then they're also going to need to know the shared value, which the shared value is the value of the municipality as a whole that adopted the urban renewal plan. And if the urban renewal plan goes outside that boundary, then it's that portion that goes outside the boundary as well. So the assessor's office is going to take that tax rate and they're going to multiply it by the increment value. And that's going to give you the amount that the urban renewal plan would raise. And then they're going to divide that by the shared value to come up with a rate. So this is kind of what it looks like in that chart. So a city, if you had a permanent rate for a city of 6.4482 per thousand, once you put it through the calculation, they would come up with a division of tax rate of 1.0855. So the city is going to lose 1.0855 to the urban renewal, and all the taxes that are going to be billed for the city across the whole shared value area, or the whole city boundary, I should say, is 5.3627. Same thing's going to happen with the school, the county, the RFPD. So you're going to take all these amounts that get peeled off of those district rates, add them together, and that 2.8277 becomes the rate that the urban renewal will extend. And then the rates down below here are going to be the rates that those districts extend. So from a taxpayer's perspective, they don't see a difference in their tax bill. It's just a difference in where the money gets divided out. That is a very simplified version of that. Does anybody have any questions about that? I'm really surprised. Okay. Well, you guys can feel free to ask them if you do. Just holler out.
I have a question.
Okay.
Is there flexibility in how long the tax increment financing is adopted for?
So the only limit on that is up to your maximum indebtedness. So you can continue going, dividing tax until you reach that cap of your maximum indebtedness. So when the plan gets established, they establish that they're going to do certain things, and it's going to, they're going to allow themselves to accrue this much debt. And that is how much you can continue to divide taxes until you reach that cap.
So that is then the amount that is set in the plan as to when it will be, not collected anymore. Is that right?
Essentially, yeah. But along the way, these plans can go on for long term. I mean, we have urban renewal plans that are out there for 20, 30 years, even more. They can do amendments to them. Some of this is out of the department's authority, so I can just tell you, I know this happens. I don't know exactly the process that it takes to do that. But there are instances where they can go through plan amendments to increase that maximum indebtedness. They have to get buy-in from other districts, I know, and then at some point they have to stop taking, or they have to parse that division of tax down. But districts can also choose to, maybe you have enough money in your district to do your projects for a couple of years. They can cease taking division of tax for a few years, and then, redo that, start taking it again when they need more money. There's nothing limiting them in that regard. They can take lesser division of tax, so they can ask for a smaller increment value be used in this calculation. There's some flexibility there, or they can ask for their maximum authority in order to get the maximum they need. So.
And so if the city is collecting urban renewal revenues, is there a time limit by which they have to be spent?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, generally with any tax revenue, you should have a use for them or have some sort of purpose for reserving them year to year. So that's really a fiscal policy question, though, that we can't speak to. But
if I could chime in on that a little bit, we do have an urban renewal plan, and I can send that link out to the group. But we just adopted that, I believe, in 2016. And so it goes out for about 30 years, and there is a plan within that.
Nice.
And I can just share that, in addition, we did just form the Community Advisory Committee. I think we talked about that at the last budget meeting, and that is looking at that plan and figuring out what to prioritize out of that plan for the next 5 years. And I imagine that we'll have something like that going forward. I don't know if we'll stay in 5-year increments or not, but that's sort of the way that we'll go forward on chipping away at the projects that are outlined in the plan.
And I think to Leslie's question about, does anything make you spend the money? I mean, I don't recall that anything in the plan set a deadline, but I mean, the whole point is to raise your tax base, right? And the whole interest of, all the other taxing districts who are foregoing their revenue as well is that you raise your tax base by doing the projects. So, I mean, there is definitely inherently pressure to, use the money to do that.
So now I have another question. The ultimate goal is to raise the tax base of the city as a whole. Is that it, or the tax base of the properties within the district? I'm trying to figure out at what point the city gets more revenues from the creation of the urban renewal district. That's what I don't understand.
So I don't know what your plan was established for, but in general terms, usually there's some sort of blight that you're looking at. So that could be a really economically rundown area, and so you're doing this urban renewal in order to give business loans or do some sort of improvement to the area to incentivize new growth there. And so, I guess it could depend on how big your projects are when you see that turnaround. But generally you're doing something that's going to show some sort of, I don't know, you might want to see what the plan outlines as far as what the goals were.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that there's some controversy around urban renewal areas because the goal has been on increasing tax base, and so certainly in our work, and I think more generally across the board, urban renewal areas are now operating with a pretty keen eye toward making sure that those improvements benefit the current businesses and the current residents and tenants, rather than displacement, which is what happened a lot, particularly in the 80s and earlier, and it led to really some pretty awful impacts for communities that were already disadvantaged. So, the goal is to raise the tax base for the city as far as the URA is worded, but I would also point out that it is intended to benefit the community, to increase prosperity, and to make the urban renewal area more beneficial to the community as a whole.
Yeah, and urban renewal, like I mentioned earlier, it's one of those things that it's gone through so many renditions over the years. There's been amendments to the law that they actually called the World Peace Plan, where they were like, you can't amend this anymore for a while because it's gotten so complex that we just need to stop. So it's kind of gotten out of hand, and they're trying to bring it back. So the 19th session, they passed an amendment to make all future adopted plans and any substantial amendment to existing plans be this kind of simplified permanent rate plan is what we call it. So they can only divide from permanent rate taxes. So local option levies won't get hit, bonds won't get hit. So I think there is some goal, some hope to narrow this to be a very streamlined program that can only be used, or not only be used, but make it more focused and make it less impactful to other districts. But it's a long ways out because there's some long-term plans out there. So, okay, well, now that we're all experts on urban renewal, maybe it's taken a lot of years just to get part of it down. I will tell you that much. So let's talk a little bit about the property tax cycle. This is probably the simplest slide today, so I'm very excited for that. So this is just so you guys can kind of see what the whole picture looks like. So as a local government, you start the cycle at the top by adopting your budget, and certifying your taxes. And there's some deadlines on here they're pretty firm in statute. So June 30th is the deadline for local governments to adopt their budgets. And then you have to certify your taxes by July 15th. The assessor's role is to appraise the property and calculate the taxes, and they have to have that work done by September 25th. And then they pass the tax roll over to the tax collector, who sends out the bills and, of course, collects tax. They are required to have tax bills out by October 25th. And then payments are paid, they're due on trimesters, so you can pay your taxes in 3 equal installments in November, February, and May, or you can pay it all at once. If you pay everything by November 15th, you get a 3% discount. If you pay 2/3 by November 15th, you get a 2% discount. So those payments come into the treasurer, and then the treasurer disperses those out to the tax districts. Usually the bulk of the payments get out to the tax districts by December, early December. What I think is really important to know is that they distribute tax payments based on a distribution schedule. So when all the taxes are certified in, they create the schedule based on all the levies that were extended. And so every dollar that comes in gets proportioned out to everybody. So, some districts that are really small, the county just buys them outright. They can do that. Otherwise, you'll get a portion of every dollar that gets collected. So everybody's, it's keeping the money flowing. If there's one area that's not paying their taxes as frequently as another area, they're not going to, be getting their money late. Everybody's going to get a little portion of every dollar in the county. We did mention some other resources out there. This is a favorite video of ours. It's the Property Tax Fairy on YouTube. And so it goes into some history of the Measure 5 and Measure 50 that Jean talked about. It was produced by Deschutes County back in, I think, 2010 or 11. So it's kind of right after that, the bubble burst of the real estate market. And so there was a lot of people asking about compression at that time. It's a little cheesy, but it's very informative. So if you just get on YouTube and you search for Property Tax Fairy Oregon, it'll come right up. The other one is to go onto YouTube again, and the Oregon Association of County Tax Collectors, OACTC, has started their own YouTube channel, and they had several videos produced, I think 4 or 5 videos. They're all about 5 minutes long or less, and they explain certain aspects of property taxes. So if you're curious about, appeals or where your taxes go, there's some good videos there. And then also our Department of Revenue website, you can get links to the property tax statistics report, the tax expenditure report, which has all the tax exemption information in it. There's an urban renewal flyer, and also all our local budget law training materials are on there as well. So if you're just curious about certain parts of local budget law, you can get on there and learn some about that. So that is what we had for you guys tonight. If you have any other questions, we're glad to take them now. I'm going to quit sharing this, though, for a moment so I can actually see you guys.
I have to say that I've done the property tax fairy video. I've watched it several times. It is very, very interesting. It's a really good video. So I do highly encourage that, yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that when some property comes out of being an exemption, it's reset. It's assessed value is reset. I mean, I thought you indicated you were going to talk about that. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't have that on my point. So that's more of an appraisal thing. So there is in the Constitution where it talks about maximum assessed value, it does say that you have to reset that when it comes out of an exemption situation. So yeah, that's, again, that's more of an appraisal side of things that we don't work with.
Most of those exemptions that you listed, that were on your slide, or that you listed, seem to be things that would be pretty long term. They're not just.
Yeah, exemptions can vary. There's a lot of them that are just, you're exempt as long as you're doing that. Like religious, for example, you apply once, and as long as you're continuing to be a church, you're going to be exempted. There are exemptions that require annual applications. And so, but again, you don't come out of them every year. It's just that you have to apply, to remain in them. There's other applications. There's one of the few homestead exemptions is for disabled veterans. And so once you're granted that exemption, you continue on as long as you remain in your home. That exemption stays there, and as long as you still are a disabled veteran, which I don't think that changes very often once it's established. So.
Thank you.
All right. Well, you guys can feel free to email us, call us. We're usually available. We're working from home, if you couldn't tell. So, contact us anytime. We're always here.
I appreciate every time I hear from you folks. So thank you.
You're welcome.
It's nice to see the faces with the names. So it was nice meeting you. That's the only negative part with the online meetings is you don't get to meet personally. But thank you for having us.
Yes.
Yep, thank you.
All right.
So I guess with that, we go over to Bonnie and going through our quarterly report, or was there something else before that?
Nope, I think we're all ready for the quarterly report. Okay. Okay, so we are talking about the third quarter of fiscal year ending, fiscal year 2021 ending. And I have quite a few changes that we did to this report in this quarter. The numbers themselves are pretty much similar. We haven't had any major changes in this last quarter. The most significant changes are really just more of adding in the verbiage and giving a lot more details basically to the story of what's going on with the city financials. On the first page, I am going to highlight that we did finally receive our financial statement audit. We got the unmodified opinion from the auditors from fiscal year 2020 audit. It's, as I mentioned before, it's extremely behind only because we've had to do extensions related to the CARES Act. And so fortunately, the CARES Act funding, we received no findings, and so all the funding that we did receive actually is now considered a forgivable loan, so the city can absorb those funds into our financials. And so I talked a little bit about the CARES Act at the last meeting during the budget transfers. So at the June 1st meeting, we are doing a budget supplemental that incorporates in the CARES Act to just separate it out from the general fund and transferring it over to the appropriate funds that expenses were used for. And going forward with overall, we did receive our awards for our financial statements from the previous fiscal year, and we did submit in for our fiscal year 2020. More than likely, it will be probably in the fall before we hear back if we receive the award, but I feel pretty confident that we'll have another award year. And again, appreciation to the team and Keith McClung and Judy, who was definitely instrumental in getting that through. I'm going to focus you all to page 3 in the quarterly report for property taxes. So based off of feedback from the last meeting and also working with Leslie, who I want to thank tremendously, who worked us through this report, the property tax section, along with just doing another double check in general, has been a huge and immense help. So I appreciate all of Leslie's help on it. But we did expand the property tax section. We've added a lot more verbiage, a lot more explanation about the difference between the real market value and the assessed value, and then also how that looks with the property tax dollars, that revenue that the city is receiving, and the operating costs that the general fund has, and the variance between those two. So previously we had one graph that combined everything. And that seemed to be very confusing. So we ended up splitting out the two graphs, and you can see that on page 4 and 5. So there's that. Now we show just the real market value versus the assessed value, and you can definitely see that the assessed value is considerably lower in comparison to the real market value. And then when you look at the property taxes collected on page 5 in that graph, the dark blue line is the revenue that the city receives, but you can see that that trend is not keeping up with the operating expenses that we have within the city. So we're hoping that this is actually a lot more information and in depth to help kind of paint that picture of why property taxes in the city is not keeping up with the costs. I think this is probably going to be just about anywhere and everywhere. I was actually just talking to my peers over at other cities like West Lynn, and how the property taxes there are so much different than here, and the permanent tax rate is considerably lower than what we have in Milwaukee. But obviously the assessed values in those homes and the real market value is very different. So it's definitely from city to city very different. And for Milwaukee, we paint the picture, as you can see here, that it's just not quite. It's not connecting. It's not. There's definitely a disparity between the two. So is there any questions on this section? I wasn't going to read it, and I'm hoping that everybody had a moment to take some time to read through it.
I thought it looked great, Bonnie. I really appreciate all the work you put into it. I think this is a really clear explanation, and I know I'll find it useful because I do get questions about property tax and, why are they so high and what are they doing? And I think this will be really useful for kind of illustrating a little more of the story without going super deep into measures 5 and 50. And, once you start going down that road, you lose people. I get lost. So I really appreciate the level at which you kept this information. I thought it was well done.
I agree, really well done.
Great. Well, thank you. The next section that we added on was franchise fees. This was to highlight where we're at in basically general fund franchise fees and the collection. It was based off of a comment from the previous quarterly report to kind of highlight the where we are in our revenue and how we're tracking. We did, in the time that we created this report, we did have some late payers. Waste Management was one of them. They have since paid that. And also, we had a few other late payers, and I think that some of those have trued up by now. But there's also the question regarding Comcast, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Keith. He's been watching this closely, what's going on with Comcast, and then he can also help answer any other questions that are related to franchise fees.
Good evening, everybody. Sorry about the mix-up earlier when there was roll call. I'm Keith McClung. I'm the Assistant Finance Director. And with respect to Comcast, as you know, the last time we spoke, the city of Beaverton and Comcast were in litigation. They still are. So that judgment is still pending. I think the next update or required response from both parties is in July. So that will kind of dictate the way forward in terms of how franchise fees are levied or put into place by these companies. So it's a $3.8 million lawsuit, and it addresses fees outside of when Comcast started collecting the fee from customers. So to give you an idea, there was a time period in which Comcast did not pay, and when they started paying, it was just kind of a pass-through from their customers. So there's a time period that the city of Beaverton is going after. They're doing that in a countersuit. So Comcast is challenging the franchise fee in general, and Beaverton is countersuing. So the next step is in July. So with respect to franchise fees in general, Waste Management was rather the largest one of the group that was in late payment status. They have since paid, and the reason for the lateness was we were doing a rate review with our associate Chris Bell, who we hire. So there was a delay in some of the financials and basically the payment that we received. It wasn't as a result of Chris's work. It was as a result of just timing and being able to get the work done. So everything is on track in terms of fees in general. We do have a handful of late payers in the telecom industry. Those are typically $250 a quarter. A few have since paid, but nothing material is open in terms of the telecom market. There is one electrical service provider, that is Constellation New Energy, and they are late. So we are pursuing basically collection efforts, and will assess a penalty or late fee going forward. But other than that, every franchise, go ahead.
Well, just to clarify that, so the large back fees that I think it was Verizon owed, they have now paid that?
No. Verizon, according to our municipal code, is not required to pay. And so that's where we are updating our code, or in the process of getting the code updated and challenging Verizon to pay franchise fees.
Keith?
So Comcast and, yes.
That is substantially different than what we've been told before.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. But I do think that if we actually think we need a code fix in order to collect, we need to have a conversation with council pretty fast.
Yeah, it is much more involved in that. So I don't mean to simplify a simple code change. It takes research according to the rules and so forth. So it's not that simple. But I agree with you.
Verizon, AT&T, they all came and testified the last time we did a code package. So, I mean, I think they thought they were on the hook to pay. So I'm a little concerned about that. And I guess the other question I had was, you said the Beaverton litigation is about challenging the right. Comcast is challenging the right to collect franchise fees at all, or just challenging the amount or the means of assessment? I mean, surely it's been established in Oregon law by now, the right to collect franchise fees.
Yes, the amount. You're correct. Yes.
Hey Keith, just to clarify, are you referring to, and I'm totally drawing a blank on the terminology, but the new system with the pole, like where the Verizon Wireless 5G, yes, 5G. I knew it was there 5 in there somewhere. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, the 5G.
The code change? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
My understanding from another section of the report is that the code change that you're talking about, Keith, is related to being able to charge for data rather than just telecom. Isn't that what it said?
Correct.
Okay.
There's a yes.
I mean, I don't know anything about it. I just happened to read that.
So I'm totally confused at this point. I was under the impression, clear back when Reba was still working for us, that we had passed a code package that caused the internet providers to have to pay, and they all were fighting it and were not paying. But as far as we were concerned, they owed it. Has something changed in the intervening time that we're not aware of?
It sounds like like to me there's two separate issues here. I think the code change is related to the 5G, and I think there's another component that I'm not 100% sure I understand either. But with Verizon, and that's something I think we're going to have to dig deeper into.
Mayor, we're going to set up a meeting for you and me to sit down with Keith and Bonnie, and we will bring it to council. So it'll be before you all in the next couple months. Sorry for the delay.
I was going to say, and it also would be part of that. I'd like to know how much 5G installation we've had happen since that code package. If any, I don't know. Maybe it's done. Maybe it's zero.
I also, if possible, I'd like to have a little bit more information about why the lawsuit in Beaverton, if it's about the amount that they've been charged, why that would have any impact on and bearing on whether or not they're paying here in Milwaukee. If they're not challenging the right to assess, then this isn't making sense to me, but we might not have time for it tonight, so it'd be part of the next meeting.
And it's been added to the list. Thank you, Counselor.
Okay, moving on to the next section is another updated section regarding the utility revenue. So I had added in two tables, and essentially those tables are to talk about the receivables. Let's see. So as of March 31st, the user fee receivables, and I broke them out into which pot they're in. So the water fund is seeing a receivable of about $161,000. Wastewater is the largest of the utilities, and that's basically $259,000. Stormwater is $145,000, and then streets maintenance is $28,000, and safe is $33,000. And then we also wanted to demonstrate what that looks like for how many customers would be actually shut off if we weren't having the moratorium that we are now. And that second table shows that there's only about commercial customers is 13. The majority of it is residential, at about 366. And so although there is a large receivable, we still do show that there is more revenue coming in. You'll see that actually in the funds. So it's not really a different outlook than what we've talked about in the previous quarterly reports. We're still seeing that revenue stream is higher, but the receivable still continues to inch up. We did have some folks come off of that list with the letters that we sent out, and I apologize, I had that right in front of me, but I had to change rooms and I did not bring that piece of paper. But we did have some people that did pay off on their utility payments once we sent out that letter, basically saying that at some point in time the city will start collecting again. And actually, in fact, I know just last week there was a customer that came to City Hall and they paid about $1,800 in cash. So people are starting to pay, so which is great. Go ahead, Mayor.
So am I incorrect that the federal funds are not covering those losses?
So what I have read with the 150-page report is that there's actually a calculation based off of the total citywide revenue, and that calculation is quite in depth. And basically, you take 2019 revenue and you increase it by a percentage of what should have been. It's like 3 to 4%, and then you take. Long story short, it's an in-depth calculation. So I still don't think that the loss in the utility revenues is not part of that equation. But that is something that we are still definitely learning and looking into. The utility fees, though, that was separate because we are still expecting that revenue to come in. The transportation fund, like the state gas tax fund, we're never going to see that revenue come back. But the utility fees, that's the we're hoping to see that receivable. Now, utility assistance is a different story, though, and we can use some of that ARPA funds towards utility assistance, I believe, because we're not actually replenishing the revenue in the utility accounts without having some kind of assistance for all the late utility payments, if that is a bit clearer.
Well, it got a little tangled up there, but the question I'm asking very clearly is, poor people who have not been able to pay their rent or their utilities are not going to all of a sudden have their water cut off when whatever moratorium, at the point that the moratorium ends, the federal government is covering those costs, so that will be written off. Is that not correct?
Mayor, an alternative way to say this is that we have a program right now through St. Vincent's de Paul to cover the cost for individuals who are in crisis, and we would encourage them to go to St. Vincent's and to utilize the funds that we have allocated there. Those funds would then be used to come back and pay back into this fund balance. But yes, there is a way for people who are in crisis to receive a payment instead of having to make that payment themselves, so that we can support those in crisis. There's two ways we could backfill it. One is we could have them go through this process and confirm that the individual is going through something. Or two, we could backfill into our funds. We're choosing to go through this option where we have people actually communicate to St. Vincent's de Paul and confirm that they have suffered under the COVID crisis. And then we are waiving those payments, basically.
Okay, and for people who don't watch the budget committee meetings or the city council meetings or whatever other way we've communicated that, how are they going to know to do this?
We've actually sent letters to people who are who have not paid, so that they receive something directly in their mail to say, we encourage you to contact St. Vincent's de Paul so that you can have this payment made for you instead of having to have you make this payment. So we've done that twice. We've also put it out through multiple channels for individuals in crisis, such as Northwest Housing Alternatives. I actually spoke with the social workers at all the elementary, junior high, and high schools. We've had communication to, today I met with a couple of the churches to encourage them to actually send people through St. Vincent's as well. And we've gone through every route we can. It's been on our Facebook page. This is one of the programs that's been consistently available throughout the pandemic. So we're trying to get people to go use the program.
So I guess where I'm at is so roughly, how many households are there that are behind on the utility payments?
Well, at the time of this report, it was the 366 households. Accounts.
Okay. So before we shut off anybody's water, I would like us to have an actual phone call with that family to go through this process that they can reach out to.
I am happy to talk to you about that offline. Having a phone call from staff to 366 households, and in some cases I don't have their phone numbers, that is going to be difficult. But I'm happy to see if there's something that we need to do that's further, and staff and I have had those discussions.
Okay.
And we made an initial tranche of money to St. Vincent de Paul, and then I think we made a second one. Is that right?
We've only made one tranche at this point because there was still a significant amount of funds. What we discussed is that with the new ARPA funds coming out, that funds from that program would be used over to the utility assistance if we could move it successfully. We included that in the staff report, both as a payment through those individuals, through St. Vincent's de Paul back to the city, as well as a backfill if we're unable to collect for a percentage of years.
And we don't have, we aren't currently shutting anyone's water off, and we don't have a timeline for when shutoffs will resume at this point, do we?
We do not, and we have not. So we are at this point 14 months in without a shutoff.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll move on to the staffing levels, which is on page 7 of the report. So previous quarters, we've just put in the table, but now I put in a little bit more explanation about what those changes that happened in the quarter. So a lot of movements have happened. A lot of employees have vacated. We did have a municipal court supervisor position that we did eliminate in this last quarter. But the majority of actually the engineering, the fleet, and the police department and the wastewater fund have all had those positions filled since the third quarter ended, or are in the middle of recruitment at this point in time. So is there any other questions on the FTE count, the staffing levels in the city? Okay, and then lastly, I just added in a little bit more verbiage into the annual revenue forecast assumption, since that was part of some questions from the last quarter. So try to make that a little bit more clear. This is just what we typically bring in revenue in the time period of what we do. Property taxes, since we mentioned that earlier, we do actually usually get that first distribution that Danette and Jean talked about in early December. So I just wanted to point that out, that it is correct that the majority of it comes in November, and we actually see that revenue coming into December. Okay, so going into the quarterly financials in total, so we have seen a increase in fund balances of about 13%. A lot of that is, the majority of it is that we're either underspending or have projects that we have not yet started. It's not atypical that we have a 13% increase in fund balances in the third quarter. Our interest overall has reduced once again in all of the funds. LGIP interest has reduced from 0.75% to 0.60%, which is definitely starting to get a little bit closer to what we budgeted at 0.5%. So throughout the funds, we're seeing that we actually have more interest than we had planned on during the budget process, because we were very conservative that we thought the interest rate was going to get reduced. But it is now starting to get closer and closer to that 0.5%. Going into the general fund on page 10, there's really not much to talk about here that hasn't already occurred in the previous quarter. And this is pretty much the same throughout the entire financial package for the quarter. We still have the property taxes came in higher than we anticipated by about 3%. We've had significantly see the traffic citations reduced. License and permits have come in lower than we anticipated. Then miscellaneous revenue is higher than we expected, related to some vehicles and trailers that we have sold. And then going into the expenditures, the biggest variance that you see there is in community development, and that is really related to some projects that weren't started yet. And then the police department, the professional services fees are related to all the policies that I know Anne's been working on, the police department's been working on for the police department. Moving on to City Hall Fund, unless anybody's got any questions on the general fund. Actually, I don't really have much to say on City Hall Fund nor the debt service fund, so I'm going to fast forward on over to the building fund, which is on page 15. Again, we're seeing increases in revenues for building fund, which is great. We are also seeing a lower cost in the materials and services for contractual services. But overall, the fund is doing quite as expected. And I wanted to point out there was a follow-up question that I added into the report related to code enforcement. And so I reached out to the external auditors and just asked if that could possibly have any of the building fund revenue that we received be used towards code enforcement. And unless there's a building fee that we actually are charging very specific to code enforcement, we can't use any funds related to code enforcement from the building fund. The building fund is a restricted revenue fund, so it is very, there's not much more you can do with it. But the one thing to keep in mind with the building fund is that it fluctuates so much. And I know when I first started here in 2013, the building fund, it was really low. So you really do have to rely on that, the reserve. Yeah, go ahead, Councilor Beatty.
Can you clarify, I mean, I'm sure it's not a huge percentage of his work, but I mean, some of what the code enforcement officer does is about building, is about dangerous buildings and things that do seem related to the building fund, or to the kind of services that are paid for out of the building fund. So there's really no room to do anything there.
There's not. It's a completely a restricted fund.
Okay.
Yeah, unless we start charging a fee specific.
Is that restricted by state law or by our own code?
No, that's state law. Yeah, and building fund has traditionally been a restricted revenue fund. There's not much you can really do outside of using those funds for the building. And there's things that you can do. You can do things like interfund loan, or you can do, you can purchase other things through the building fund for building related activities. But outside of that, you can't use funds for other activities and other funds. Okay, so moving into page 16 is the Affordable Housing Fund. I added in there that this is related to the Construction Excise Tax Fund, and we will make that change in the budget process. Overall, this is the same picture. That the supplemental is going to be on June 1st, and it's going to include the $122,433 that we've spent on. But other than that, the fund is remain as a whole. Okay, so I don't actually have much to say on the library fund. Again, it's the same that we've had before with the revenues are down. The property taxes came in as expected. Is there any questions on the library fund? So transportation fund, again, is very similar. There was a question that came up on the vehicle registration fee, and we did get an answer from the county on that, because in the state gas tax program, the fee is coming in higher than we anticipated in the budget process. And what we have understood it from the county is that there is a timing difference there. So there was a moratorium that happened in the beginning of the pandemic where you didn't need to buy your tags and so forth. But that is starting to catch up. And so there was this huge influx in the beginning of the moratorium. Then we had this huge wait period, I guess. And so now we're going to start seeing revenues kind of more stabilize. So that's what we were anticipating based off of the conversations that we did have with the county. But we're going to continue to watch it because it is coming in at 215% more than we had anticipated. But those are based off of county projections.
So the county dramatically underestimated? Is that what you're telling us here?
Yes, from what I am understanding that and I don't know if the county also, I mean, estimates are hard to predict, right?
Right.
But they did estimate, I think, about $35 per vehicle, and I don't know if people just bought more cars and knowing they didn't have to pay right away. I'm not really sure all the dynamics of it, but we are working with the county to kind of get better clarification and through that process. They do.
Yeah, well, and that's good to know. And just so anyone who happens to be watching knows that's a new fee, and it's one that has been really beneficial to the city because it's money that we can use to close the gap on lots of different projects that we have going on around the city. A lot of our capital improvement projects that we just didn't quite have enough money to do. So it really has been useful for us to have that vehicle registration fee. Clackamas County is the last one to adopt one in the Tri-County area. Multnomah County and Washington County have both had them for many, many years. So it's a useful thing for us to have, and the vehicle registration fee in Clackamas County is much lower than in Multnomah or Washington counties.
And it makes up to some degree our losses on gas taxes and the fact that when we set up our SSMP fee, the paving fee, it wasn't originally set up to increase with inflation. So we fell behind on being able to pave with that fund. We've fixed that aspect of it, but it's starting out behind the curve. So that vehicle registration vehicle registration fee is very useful to us specifically, and more importantly, the minute you leave the city of Milwaukee driving south, you're driving on county roads, and they have not had the funding forever to actually fund their roads appropriately.
And I think council will be diving into some of those issues a little more tomorrow. So anybody who's really interested can tune in tomorrow.
Okay, is there any questions more related to the transportation fund? The water, wastewater, and stormwater fund, like I said earlier, there's the new connections and the usage is up, so we're seeing the increase in revenue, but there is that receivable that is outstanding. But overall, I don't really actually have much more to enlighten on these funds. There's a lot of the capital projects that have started in some. I know we have the SCADA project that's been ongoing. But other than that, does anybody have any other questions on the utility funds or the SDC fund? And then the last fund is the URA fund. And again, the property taxes was the biggest change that we have seen there but in this fiscal year. As far as the quarter goes, there really hasn't been much change from the previous quarter. With that, I don't actually have anything else. The reports are in the back. I did switch the memo to be in front of the project detail report. Does anybody else have any questions? I know I have some grammar fixes to still make, and I again want to just thank Leslie for helping with those and taking a look at the report, and also helping us with the property tax section. So that's been a huge help, and I do appreciate her guidance on that.
I am glad that you asked me to help. I appreciated the opportunity, and I think that it was a good process. I'm going back to the transportation fund, though. When I look at the footnotes in that schedule, it goes 1, 2, 2, 3, and then 4. There's 4 footnotes in the schedule, but I don't see I don't see the explanation of those notes in the narrative. So maybe I don't think it's critical, but it just seems to me that it ought to connect.
It should, and that's one of the grammar errors that I will go back and take a look at. I think actually what happened is that we had a note on utility impact fees from the last quarter, and so it didn't get included. It got removed from the notes, but I didn't update the numbers.
Oh, okay. Well, the other thing I would like to say is I really, really appreciated the extra little narratives that connected the questions from the previous meeting to the answers in this package. I found that very helpful. And I want to thank you guys for doing it.
Yeah, well, good. Good, I'm glad. I actually, I really do like having more explanation, so I feel pretty good about this report, so thank you. Okay. All right.
So that's it for the quarterly report. We have an item 8, other items. Are there any other items?
I might be a little bit too optimistic, but it sounds like we might actually have this meeting in person for the next time around, so which is great since we've had so many technical issues today. I can't wait, and I can't wait to see everyone. So thank you. Yeah, so I'm hoping that we're going to be able to be in a room together next time.
Which would be August, 3 months?
Yeah, August, September, yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's all I had.
Anybody else have anything for the good of the order? People ready to go? Does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.